Good morning. Page 219, Chapter 9, The Kids with Tommy Guns. The camps were guarded by men in long gray coats with black cuffs. They were guarded by Red Army men. They were guarded by prisoner guards. They were guarded by elderly reservists. Last came the robust youngsters born during the first 5-year plan who had seen no war service when they took their nice new Tommy guns and set about guarding us. Twice every day, for an hour at a time, we and they shuffled along, tied together in silent and deadly brotherhood. Any one of them was at liberty to kill any one of us. Every morning we dawdled listlessly along, we on the road and they on the shoulder, to a place where neither they nor we wished to go. Every evening we stepped out briskly, we to our pen and they to theirs. Since neither we nor they had any real home, these pens were home to us. We walked with never a glance at their sheepskin coats and their Tommy guns. What were they to us? They walked watching our dark ranks all the time. It was there in the regulations that they must watch us all the time. Orders were orders, duty was duty. Any wrong movement, any false step, they must cut short with a bullet. How did they think of us in our dark jackets, our gray caps of stolen fur, our grotesque felt boots that had served 3 sentences and shed 4 souls, our crazy quilt of number patches? Decent people were obviously never treated like that. Was it surprising that our appearance inspired disgust? It was intended to do just that. From their narrow footpaths, the free inhabitants of the settlements, especially the school children, and their women teachers, darted terrified glances at our columns as we were led down the broad street. They showed how much they dreaded that we, the devil's brood of fascism, might suddenly go berserk, overcome the convoy guards, and rush around looting, raping, burning, and killing. Obviously, such bestial creatures could conceive no other desires, and inhabitants of the settlement were protected from these wild beasts by convoy troops, the noble convoy troops, a sergeant of convoy guards, inviting the school teacher to dance in the club we had built for them. Could feel like a knight in shining armor. These kids watched us the whole time, from the cordon and from the watchtowers, but they were not allowed to know anything about us. They were allowed only the right to shoot without warning. They had just visited us in our huts of an evening, sat on our bunks and heard why this old man and the other old fellow over there was inside. Those towers would have been unmanned, and those Tommy guns would never have fired. But the whole cunning and strength of the system was in the fact that our deadly bond was forged from ignorance, and sympathy they showed us for us was punishable by treason, as treason. Any wish to speak to us as a breach of a solemn oath. And what was the point of talking to us when the political instructor would come at fixed intervals to lead a discussion on the political and moral character of the enemies of the people who they were guarding? He would explain in detail and with much repetition how dangerous these scarecrows were, and what a burden to the state. Which made it all the more tempting to try them out as living targets. He would bring some files under his arm and say that the special section had let him take a few cases just for the evening. He would read our some typewritten pages about evil doings, for which all the ovens of Auschwitz could not be punishment enough, attributing them to the electrician who was mending the light on a post nearby, or to the carpenter from whom certain soldiers had imprudently thought of ordering lockers. The political instructor will never contradict himself, never make a slip. He will never tell the boys that some people are imprisoned here simply for believing in God, or simply for desiring truth, or simply for love of justice, or indeed for anything at all. The whole strength of the system is in the fact that one man cannot speak directly to another, but only through an officer or a political instructor. The whole strength of these boys lies in their ignorance. The whole strength of the camp is in these boys with red shoulder tabs, the murderers from watchtowers, the hunters of fugitives. Here is one such political lesson as remembered by a former convoy guard at Nairobi. Lieutenant Samutin was a lanky, narrow-shouldered man, and his head was flat above the temples. He looked like a snake. Wow, what an image. I can totally picture that. He was tow-headed and almost without eyebrows. We knew that in the past he had shot people with his own hands. Now he was a political instructor, reciting in a monotonous voice, "The enemies of the people over whom you stand guard are the same as the fascists, filthy scum. We embody the power and the punitive sword of the motherland, and we must be firm. No sentimentality, no pity." That is how they mold these boys, who make a point of kicking, who make a point of kicking a runaway's head when he is down. The boys who can boot a piece of bread out of the mouth of a gray-haired old man in handcuffs, who can look with indifference at a shackled runaway jounced on the splintery boards of a lorry. His face is bloodied, his head is battered, but they look unmoved, for they are the motherland's punitive sword, and he, so they say, is an American colonel. After Stalin's death, living in eternal banishment, I was a patient in an ordinary free Tashkent. Tashkent clinic. Suddenly, I heard a patient, a young Uzbek, telling his neighbors about his service in the army. His unit had, he said, kept guard on beasts and butchers. The Uzbek admitted that the convoy guards were also somewhat underfed, and it enraged them that the prisoners, like miners, got rations, if, of course, they fulfilled the norm by 120%, not much smaller than those of honest soldiers. It also enraged them that they, the convoy guards, had to freeze on top of watchtowers in the winter, in sheepskin coats down to their heels, it's true, while the enemies of the people, once they entered the working area, scattered about the warming-up shacks. Even from the watchtower they could have seen that it was not so. And slept there all day. He seriously imagined that the state's treatment of its enemies was philanthropic. Here was an interesting opportunity to look at a special camp through the eyes of a cowboy. Through the eyes of a convoy guard. I began asking what kind of reptiles they were, and my Uzbek friend had talked, and whether my Uzbek friend had talked to them personally, and of course he told me that he had learned all this from political officers. That they had even had cases read out to them in their political indoctrination sessions, and his malicious misconceptions about prisoners sleeping all day had of course been reinforced in him by the approving nods of the officers. Woe unto you that cause these little ones to stumble. Better for you had you never been born. Uzbek also told us that a private in the MVD troops received 230 rubles a month, 12 times more than he would in the army. Why such generosity? Perhaps his service was 12 times more difficult, and in the polar regions as much as 400 rubles for a fixed period of service, all with expenses covered. He further told us of a number of incidents. Once, for instance, one of his comrades was marching in convoy and fancied that somebody was about to run out of the column. He pressed his trigger and killed 5 prisoners with a single burst. Since all the other guards later testified that the column had been moving quietly along, the soldier incurred a terrible punishment. For killing 5 people, he was put in detention for 15 days, in a warm guardhouse, of course. But which of the archipelago's inhabitants has no stories of this sort to tell? We knew so many of them. In the corrective labor camps, on a work site which had no fence but was an invisible boundary line, a shot rang out and a prisoner fell dead. He had finished the line. He had stepped over the line, they said. He may have done nothing of the sort. The line was invisible, remember, but no one else would hurry over to check for fear of lying beside him, nor would a commission come to verify where the dead man's feet were lying. Perhaps so. He had overstepped the line. After all, the guards could keep their eyes on it, whereas the prisoners had to work. The most conscientious prisoner, the prisoner with thoughts for nothing but his work, is one most likely to be shot in this way. At Novochunka station, Ozerleg, haymaking, a prisoner sees a little more hay 2 or 3 steps away, and like a thirsty peasant decides to rake it in a bullet, and the soldier gets a month's leave. Sometimes a particular guard is angry with a particular prisoner for refusing to do him a favor or failure to make something ordered, and avenges himself with a bullet. Sometimes it is done treacherously. The guard orders prisoners the prisoner to fetch something from beyond the boundary line. The prisoner goes off unsuspectingly, and the guard shoots, or perhaps he tosses him a cigarette. Here we have smoke. Even a cigarette will serve as bait for a prisoner, contemptible creature that he is. Why do they shoot? Sometimes there is no answer. In Kangir, for instance, in a tightly organized camp, in a broad daylight, when there was not the faintest of possibility of an escape, a girl called Lida, a Western Ukrainian, contrived to wash her stockings in working hours and put them out to dry on the sloping ground of the camp fringe area. The man on the tower took aim and killed her outright. There was some vague rumor that he had tried to commit suicide after. Why? Because the man has a gun. Because one man has the arbitrary power to kill or not to kill another. What's more, it pays. The bosses are always on your side. They never punish you for killing somebody. On the contrary, they'll commend you, reward you, and the quicker you are on the trigger, bring him down when he's only put half a foot wrong. The more vigilant you are seen to be, the higher your reward. A month's pay, a month's leave, but put yourself in the position of HQ. What sort of division is it that can point to no display of vigilance? What is wrong with its officers? Or perhaps its acts are so docile that the guard can be reduced. A security system, once created, needs depth. Excuse My nose is running away with me. Indeed, a sort of competition springs up between sharpshooters. You killed somebody. And bought butter with your prize money, so I'll kill somebody and buy butter too. Want to pop home and paw your girl for a bit? Just pluck that gray thing over there, and away you go for a month. These were all cases of a kind of familiar to us in corrective labor camps, but the special camps were novelties. Shooting straight into a marching column, for instance, as the Uzbek's comrade did, or as they did at the guardhouse in Ozerleg, September 8, 1952. Or shooting from the towers into the camp area. That meant that they'd been trained to do it. This was the work of the political officers. In Kangir in May 1953, these kids with Tommy guns suddenly, without provocation, opened fire on a column which had halted outside the camp and was waiting to be searched on entry. 16 were wounded, but these were no ordinary wounds. The guards were using dum-dum bullets, which capitalists and socialists had long ago joined in banning. The bullets left craters. Oh, I'm so sorry. Bullets left craters in their bodies, tore holes in their entrails and their jaws, mangled their extremities. Now why should convoy guards at a special camp be armed with dum-dum bullets, on whose authority we shall never know. All the same, they were very hurt, and when they read in my story that the prisoners called their escort troops screws, saw the word repeated for all the world to hear. No, the prisoners should have loved them and called them guardian angels. One of these youngsters, one of the better ones, it's true, who didn't take offense, but wants to defend truth as he sees it, is Vladilin Zadorny, born 1933, served in the MPD troops infantry guard unit at Neroblag from the age of 18 to the age of 20. He has written me several letters. Boys did not join of their own wish. They were called up by the communists of war, by the commissariat of war. The commissariat passed them on to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The boys were taught to shoot and stand guard. The boys cried with the cold at night. What the hell did they want with places not like Neroblag and all that they contained? You mustn't blame the lads. They were soldiers serving their motherland, and although they were things they didn't understand about this absurd and dreadful form of service, how much then did they understand? It's either all or nothing. They had taken their oath. Their service was not easy. Oh. That is frank and honest. There is something to think about here. These lads were shut up inside a picket fence of words. Remember your oath, serving your motherland. You're soldiers now. Yes, but their underlying common humanity must have been weak or altogether lacking if it was not proof against an oath. And a few political discussion periods. Not every generation and not every people is of the stuff from which such boys are fashioned. This is surely the main problem of the 20th century. Is it permissible merely to carry out orders and commit one's own conscience to someone else's keeping? Can a man do without ideas of his own about good and evil, and merely derive them from the printed instructions and verbal orders of his superiors? Oaths, these solemn pledges pronounced with a tremor in their voice and intended to defend the people against evildoers. See how easily they can be misdirected into the service of evildoers against the people? So, great paragraph. Let us remember what Vasily Vlasov meant to say to his executioners back in 1937. It is your fault. You alone are to blame that they kill people. My death is on your head alone, and you must live with that. If there were no executioners, there would be no executions. If there were no convoy troops, there would be no camps. Of course, neither our contemporaries nor history will ignore the hierarchy of guilt. Of course, it is obvious that all the officers were more guilty, the security officers more guilty still, those who drew up the orders and the instructions even more guilty, and those who ordered them to be drawn up most guilty of all. But shots were fired, camps were guarded, Tommy guns were held at the ready, not by them, but by those boys. Men were kicked about the head as they lay on the ground, by no one else but those boys. Vladilin writes also, they dinned into us, they forced us to learn by heart USO 43 SS, the 1943 regulations of the Infantry Prison Guard, top secret, a cruel and frightening document. Then there was the oath. Then we had to heed the security officers and political officers. There was slander and denunciations. Cases were trumped up against some of the soldiers themselves. Divided as they were by the stockade and barbed wire, the men in the overall jackets and the men in greatcoats were equally prisoners, the former for 25 years, the latter for 3. It is putting rather strongly to say that the infantrymen were also imprisoned, only not by a military tribunal, but by the Commissariat of War. Equally prisoners they were not, but the people in greatcoats could freely cut down with their Tommy guns people in work jackets, mow down a crowd of them. Indeed, as we shall soon see, Vladilin further explains that. I don't know why all of a sudden that name was completely unpronounceable to me. So he explained that the lads were of all sorts. They were blinkered old sweats who hated sex. Incidentally, the new recruits from some ethnic minorities, Bashkir, Buryat, Yakut, were very keen. Then there were those who just didn't care, the majority. They performed their service quietly and uncomplainingly. What they liked best was the Terrell calendar and point time, finally, and post time. Finally, there were decent chaps who felt sorry for the sex as victims of misfortune, and most of us realized that our service was unpopular with the people. When we went on leave, we did not wear uniforms. Vladilin's own life story is his best argument in support of his ideas, though we must remember that there were very few like him. He was allowed into the convoy guard service by an oversight on the part of the lazy special section. His stepfather, the old trade union official, Fonino, had been arrested in 1937 and his mother expelled from the party as a result. His father, who had commanded a Cheka squad and had been a party member since 1917, made haste to disown both his former wife and his son, and so he kept his party card, but he was nevertheless demoted. His mother tried to wash away her stain as a blood donor during the war. It was all right. Party members and non-party members alike took her blood. The boy had hated the blue caps from childhood, and now they put one on my own head. The terrible night when the people in my father's uniform roughly searched my cot had left too deep a mark on my young memory. I was not a good convoy guard. I used to get into conversation with the sex and do them favors. I would leave my rifle by the campfire while I went to buy things for them at the stall or post their letters. I dare say that there were people at the intermediate Mitsakort and Parma separate campsites who still remembered Private Volodya. A prisoner foreman told me, "If you look at people and hear their troubles, you will understand." I saw my grandfather, my uncle, my aunt in every one of the political prisoners. I simply hated my officers. I grumbled and complained and told the other soldiers, "They are the real enemies of the people. For open insubordination, court sabotage, and for consorting with the Zek, I was sent for interrogation." Lanky Samutin whipped me across my face, rapped my knuckles with a paperweight because I would not give him a signed confession that I had posted letters for sex. I would have squelched that tapeworm. I'm a silver medalist at boxing. I could cross myself with an 80-pound weight. But there were 2 warders hanging on to me. Still, the interrogators had other things on their minds. The MPD in 1953 didn't know whether it was coming or going. They didn't put me inside. They just gave me a dishonorable discharge under Article 47G, discharged from the organs of the MPD for extreme insubordination and gross breaches of MPD regulations. Then they threw me out of the divisional guardhouse, beat me up, and frozen to make my way home. Beaten up and frozen to make my way home. Arsène, a foreman, released at this time, looked after me on the way. Let us imagine that a convoy guard officer wanted to show the prisoner some leniency. He could, of course, only do it through his soldiers and in their presence, which means that, given the general savagery, it would be embarrassing and in fact impossible. Besides, someone would immediately inform on him. That's the system for you. Oh, thank you so much for listening. I apologize for my yawning and my runny nose. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.